Thank you. As Kara already asked, I know a bunch of you already read this book. You don't have to ask that question. And if you read the book to the very, very end, that past the end of the book, there's a little prologue. And in that, there's one little sentence that tells you that this is based upon a true story. And the true story occurred on San Nicolas Island. Okay? So what I want to do tonight is to try to relate to you the true story, or at least as much of it as we know. A lot of it is still shrouded in mystery, and there's a lot of confusing information out there. And I've been spending some time kind of sorting through all the various tales and bits of actual information that we've been able to sort out. And so I'll tell you where we're at right now. Okay. One of the amazing things is the novel was written, and it was one of the very first, Scott O'Dell was one of the very first authors to really write historical fiction. And historical fiction is where you research the place, the times, and the people that you're writing about. And you try to weave a story that is as real, as true to that time and those people as you can. Scott O'Dell wrote the novel, and it was published in 1960. At that time, most of what I'm going to tell you tonight was not known. This is stuff that's come out since then. So if you kind of set the bar in 1960, the information he had to work with, he did really a tremendous job. Plus, add to that the fact that he was never on San Nicolas Island. So all of his descriptions are secondhand. Though he did actually attempt, he did hire a boat and he did sail out around the island as close as he could at the time. And with binoculars, he got a good look at the island. Which is why actually some of his descriptions of what the island looks like are pretty good. Especially when you consider that he was like within about 5 miles, is about as close as he got. So he actually did a really good job. And of course, the novel, it is a novel, okay? And it's a children's novel, so the heroine is a bit younger than she was in reality. But that's to appeal to kids. But the basic, tale of the story, being left alone on the island to fend for herself, is all very true. And so I just want to go through some of the actual facts of the story so you can better understand the true story and what that really meant to her. Okay, now first off, let's just start by establishing where we're at. If you're not too familiar, San Nicolas Island is the furthest out. Okay, it's 60 miles to the nearest point of land, which is Point Magoo on the mainland. It's 50 miles to Santa Cruz Island. It's 50 miles to Catalina Island. It's way out there. And it's very, very isolated. Even today, it's difficult to get to. The Navy has facilities out there, but transport to the island is regular, but you can't rely on it terribly even today because of some of the other factors. So just remember, we're talking about a place that is very isolated, and that's a real important part of the story. Just to give you a visual of the island, this is what it looks like. It's about 9 miles long. Okay. If you notice, there's not too much development other than obviously the airfield you can see here that Navy built, and a little area here called Nicktown, which is where everyone lives. That's where the majority of the buildings are, and then there's other little scattered buildings around, but it's mostly left pretty much untouched. Which is one of the great things about the island is that now when we go back and we try to research things like this, we do it through archaeology. And since so little the island's been developed, most of the archaeological sites are in real good shape. They're pretty much as they were left. There hasn't been a lot of disturbance, which is really great. Okay. To look at it topographically, the island, as you can tell up on top, is pretty flat. This indicates pretty flat terrain. And all around that is very, very steep, very, very rugged canyons. Very difficult access, even today. This end, the west end of the island, is pretty much buried in sand dunes. Okay, and this topography is an important part of the story, so just keep that in mind as we go along. As I said, that central part is very flat. Well, it's flat. These are some of the steep canyons coming down off the side, as you can see. As I said, the west end is covered with sand dunes, and we have a lot of active sand dunes and less stabilized sand dunes. Probably at the time that the lone woman was there, the sand dunes were probably fairly well stabilized. They became destabilized after the introduction of sheep ranching the sheet ate the vegetation and started the whole process of erosion over again. But it's always been a very sandy area, a lot of dune kind of vegetation. Now the island is, by definition, a desert, in that the rainfall is less than 8 inches a year. But there is a lot of fog, so we get a lot of moisture from the fog, and so we do get a reasonable amount of vegetation. But as you notice, the vegetation is all low-lying shrubs. There are no native trees. Okay, so this is where she would have had to live. Giant coreopsis is some of the biggest stuff that would have been growing at the time. Some of the flowers in morning glory. San Nicolas Island is known for two things. Historically, we read the accounts all through time. It's very foggy and it's very windy. You can probably tell by the way the tree grows that it's windy. Everybody complains about the wind and how terrible it is. And this is an important part of the story as well, so just keep that in mind. Now we do have, on San Nicolas Island, we have the island foxes, like you do on the Northern Islands. Our population is fairly large and stable, so it's not one of the endangered ones, but we do have the same sort of foxes on the island. Now the islands, you may know, the foxes on the southern islands, and that is San Nicolas, San Clemente, and Catalina, were apparently introduced to those islands by the Native Americans. And on San Nicolas Island, we have dated fox bones to 5,000 years ago. So we know that they were brought there at least 5,000 years ago. And we haven't found any evidence of them earlier, which is one of the reasons we believe that the Native Americans brought them out. We also have the island deer mouse on the island, which is also found on several of the other islands. And we have the island night lizard. Island night lizards are found on San Nicolas, San Clemente, and Santa Barbara Islands only, nowhere else in the world. They are one of our endangered species. And that's about the sum total of all the animals on land. So you can see there's not a whole lot on land. However, we do have some rather large bird rookeries, and have traditionally, with western gulls in particular, and Brandt's cormorants. Traditionally had very large rookeries on the island. And there's a number of other seabirds that nest there off and on, but these are the two main ones that are always talked about historically. We do have, however, lots of marine mammals, lots of sea lions, and we have lots of elephant seals. We also have sea otters. And historically there were large numbers throughout the Channel Islands, as you may know. And this is a real important part of the story. Okay. We do have very rich tide pools all around the island that provide lots of food if you're a Native American and you want to eat such things. And we have lots of fish. Couldn't think of a good way to represent lots of fish, but this seems to kind of fit the bill. But a whole variety of fishes. The waters are kind of a mix of cold and warm, so we have many, many different species of fish that are available out there at the island. And we've also got some pretty neat geology. The island is primarily sandstone. Over 90% is sandstone, which is what this is, and it just erodes in very fantastic forms, especially along the shoreline. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what the island kind of looks like. Now, to give you some of the cultural background, it's real important to realize that I think everyone's familiar with the Chumash being in the Santa Barbara, Ventura areas. And the Chumash are related to the northern islands. That's actually where the name Chumash comes from, is from the Santa Cruz Island. But the southern islands, they're related to the Gabrielino that are in the Los Angeles area. Okay. And the difference here is the Chumash and Gabrielino they're from different language stocks. Okay, so it's like these guys are speaking German and these guys are speaking Chinese. There's no common relationship between the languages. Okay, there's a lot of commonality in the culture, in the way they're living, but where they're coming from, their language, probably their religion and rituals and things like that are coming from totally different backgrounds. And they're kind of converging on, because they're living in the same environment, they're doing the same sorts of things. They're fishing and hunting sea mammals and collecting shellfish and things like this. So a lot of their material objects look very similar but there's a real deep-rooted cultural difference in them. This is an important part of the story as well. As I alluded to, San Nicolas is very remote and hard to get to. Okay. What I've done here is just kind of reconstructed some of the routes that probably Native Americans would have taken to get out there. And if you notice, it's not a question of coming straight out to the island, it's a matter of jumping from island to island. Okay, what this does, it reduces the length of time that you're at sea. This is 28 miles, this is about 24 miles. Instead of trying to make it 50 miles all the way across, this makes for a much safer journey. Okay, because this is a lot of water in between. And guess what? If you miss San Nicolas Island, guess what else is out there? Nothing. So probably what you're going to do is you're going to come by Catalina. It's a pretty big island. You can be seen from the mainland pretty clearly a lot of times. You make your way to Santa Barbara Island. And Santa Barbara Island's fairly small, but it sits up out of the water. And then you probably sit there for a day or two and wait to be sure that the weather's okay before you come all the way up to San Nicolas. Because one of the differences with San Nicolas is it's very low-lying, it's very flat. Very easy to get lost in the haze and the fog. So it's not an easy thing to sight on. So you want to be sure that you've got a good beat on it before you head on out. Okay. People have postulated possible journeys directly from the northern islands. I tend to doubt it. I think you would come down along the coast and make your way out like this, just because it's a much safer way to go. Remember, these are little wooden plank canoes, which you've probably seen. And the plank canoes they're seaworthy, but just barely. Okay. One of the positions on the crew is a young boy who comes along. His job is just to bail the water out because it isn't. Okay, so they can make it, but it's not the safest thing. So you want to take the safest possible route. This will be the safest possible route to get out. Okay. Just to give you an idea on some of the artifacts, pretty typical shellfish hooks. They're doing a lot of fishing. These are some of the ornaments that we found out there. More ornaments. The San Nicolas Islanders are very well known for the very artistic, very well-crafted articles like this. In fact, if you look in most books about the Chumash or about the Gabrielino, if there's a real nice picture of an artifact in there, it's probably from San Nicolas Island. Read the little caption underneath. It probably came from San Nicolas. Just because, for whatever reason, San Nicolas is known for having all the really nice, well-crafted artifacts. And they're showing us examples of certain types of things that are just wonderful. We also have, for whatever reason, really good preservation in some of the sites due to the soil chemistry. So we get things like this. Rope and cordage and things that normally would deteriorate are often preserved in sites. So we do tend to get a lot of material in the sites that you don't tend to get elsewhere, which helps us to be able to interpret and put together what was going on here historically. Your typical archaeological site looks something like this. Big pile of abalone shells. Actually, they're eating more fish than they're eating shellfish, but the fish bones are so small you don't see them right off. So if you see that many shells, there's about 10 times as much fish bone in that same photo that you just can't see. Okay, and it's a very typical site will look something like this, where you've got the shell and the fish bone. You see here the way the soil is a little darker colored in through here. That's the actual living surface where they were living, and by living there, they've changed the chemistry, they've added humus, they've added materials to the soil, and it makes this characteristically dark soil. On top of, in this case, it's on top of the sand dunes. It's a very typical site on the island. On San Nicolas Island, we also have one of the few very nice rock art sites on the Channel Islands. San Nicolas and Catalina has a couple of similar kind of real nice sites. Very little, if any, on the northern islands. But if you notice, these are all marine life. It just kind of emphasizes their connection to the marine environment, how important it was for them in terms of food, in terms of building materials. As I said, there are no trees, so your biggest and best building material comes from whales washing up on shore. Lots of big bones come with a whale. You see some of the stuff up here on the stage even. That's the kind of stuff you can build with. You can build a structure out of that. You can't out of the little shrubs that are on the island. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background about the island, what it is, and where it is. Now I want to get into the actual story of the lone woman. And the story can be broken down into basically 3 chapters. Okay? She was abandoned on the island in 1835, left alone. Okay? She lived alone by herself for 18 years, and then she was rescued, in quotes, brought back to Santa Barbara in 1853. Okay? Now we do know a fair bit about what happened when she was found, what happened when she was brought to Santa Barbara. Okay? We know a bit about the circumstances of her being abandoned on the island, but there's so many different versions of this story, it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. There's still lots and lots of questions about this whole phase, and I'll let you know what those are. But this is very much in doubt. The survival phase, since no one else was there, no one could talk to her when she came off the island, we don't know. We really don't know anything about it. I can make a lot of supposition based upon what I know about the island and about the cultures on the island as to what she might have done. But we really don't know. So I can't really say much about that. I'll say a few things about that, but not too much. But we'll try to give you the rest of the story. And once again, I'm just focusing on the facts of the story. And there's a fact here and a fact there. And how you piece them together is up to you. That's the beauty of a historical novel. You can fill in between the facts with any kind of story you want to make up. Okay? As long as you kind of, at least lock it down with the facts, just go along. No one can argue and say you've done a poor job. This is a map of California in 1823. As you can see, if you're familiar with the actual layout of the coast and where the islands actually are, it's not real accurate. But this is the state of knowledge at the time the story starts. Okay, just to give you a little background. Now I'm going to back up a little bit and give you a little bit of a preface to the story. Okay, before we actually get into her story, we have to talk a little bit about how she got to be there. Okay. Now the island was occupied, we know, for several thousand years before our story commences. We know from archaeology that at least 8,000 years, maybe as much as 11,000 years ago, people have been living on that island. Okay. One of the questions everyone always asks is, well, how many people were living on the island? And the very simple answer to that is, I don't know. I can guess, and maybe have an educated guess of 200 to 300 people, based upon what we know from other areas where we do have better records, and based upon the size of the island. 200 to 300 people seems a reasonable number to me. You may have seen, if you've done any reading, estimates as high as 1,200 people being on the island. Okay, I don't refute that, but if you read the rest of that article, it also goes on to explain that that is assuming all the sites on the island, none of them are older than 2,000 years ago. So if you took that assumption for 2,000 years, just stretched it out to 8,000 years, all of a sudden your number of people goes down. Because now they have more time to accumulate all the material on the island. So it's not contrary to that at all. It's just a different time perspective. So we have 200 to 300 people on the island. When our story really gets going, though, we're told by the historical accounts that there are between 20 and 30 people on the island. What happened to the rest of them? And you'll read, if you haven't already, a number of different stories about how the Indians came to vacate the island. One of the more popular ones, and it is based, in fact, to a certain extent, is that early in the 1800s, around 1800, 1801, Russian companies started to come down to hunt otters. Like I said, there's lots of otters, remember? And these companies, in order to hunt the otters, they brought with them expert otter hunters. And these are Native Americans they obtained up in Alaska. Called Aleuts or Aleuts, specifically generally attributed to Kodiak Island. They were brought down and they really knew how to hunt otters. The only problem is they kind of got hoodwinked into the whole process. They were up in Alaska and someone asked them if they'd like to come and go otter hunting. So they said, sure, that's what we do, we hunt otters. Well, they didn't count on being transported 2,000 miles from home, being dropped off on an island for several months at a time. So they were a little bit disgruntled, as you might imagine. And as the story goes, they got rather upset, and being a little bit of a more violent nature than the natives, they tended to have hostile encounters with the natives. And specifically with San Nicolas Island, the story usually goes something like they had a big battle and they killed off all the males so they could take the women. Now, I've never seen any historical accounts to back that up. There are some historical accounts of the Aleuts coming down and sacking, like Santa Barbara, a number of times, and various towns along the way, but no indication that they actually went through and exterminated people in any particular given area. But it could be. Okay. Most of those accounts, however, are based upon the fact that people are going out to San Nicolas Island and they're finding areas covered with human bone all over the surface. And their summation is that this is the result of some kind of horrendous battle where people were killed left and right and just left there, just lying on the ground. Okay. We now know what they're actually seeing is the cemeteries of the Indians. And the cemeteries often are placed in sandy areas. And once the erosion got started again after sheep ranching, the sand tended to blow away. And so what you end up with no sand, you end up with all the bones laying on the surface. And instead of seeing the result of one battle, you're seeing the result of hundreds of years of people dying on the island. So we know that those observations are not exactly what they were originally reported to be. We know that there's no real good historical documentation about confrontations between the Aleuts and the natives. Could have happened, quite possibly. However, a more reasonable explanation is probably that the natives succumbed due to the introduction of European diseases. Okay, the Russians certainly had direct contact, and later it was American companies who were doing the same thing. I'm going to blame everything on the Russians. But before then, of course, the Spanish were already in California. They brought diseases with them. Diseases spread very quickly. And if you don't have any resistance to a given disease, you can be seriously injured or die. Just as an example, if you're familiar with the first group of Eskimos that were taken out of the Arctic and taken to England to be presented to the Queen, they all died within about a week or two by exposure to common cold. They never had colds in the Arctic. That was a disease that just wiped them out entirely. And so if you're a native out here and these Europeans are coming in with much nastier diseases, spreading them around, they could quickly get to you, even though, so for example, the Spanish never made it to San Nicolas Island directly. If an Indian from somewhere else, where they were, went to Catalina, and from Catalina went out to San Nicolas, they could have spread diseases very, very rapidly and could very easily explain why the population dropped as much as it did. Okay. And this is something we could probably see archaeologically if we had, skeletons that show evidence of diseases and whatnot. We don't at this point in time, but it's certainly I think a probably much more reasonable explanation as to what happened to them. But at any rate, the population had dropped down significantly by the time our story begins. When about 1825 is the first time that someone actually goes out to the island locally, at any rate, and mentions that they actually went to the island. At this time, a gentleman from San Pedro went out to the island, and according to him, there were 25 to 35 people on the island. He went back to San Pedro. This was known. About 10 years later, in 1835, the Padres at the mission decided it was time that someone went out and gathered up the natives and bring them back to become part of the mission system, become civilized, whatever you want to say. At that time, a ship was dispatched to collect up the natives on the island. Okay. The name of the ship was the POS Nada, which translates as basically better than nothing. And everyone always laughs at that. Well, if you think about it, if you go out here in the harbor and look at how people name their boats, if your boat really was better than nothing, you wouldn't call it that, now would you? So it's just kind of a fun little part of the story. We don't know anything about the boat other than it was involved. It was involved in the otter trade up and down the coast. It had been down to Mexico recently a couple of times. It was up here. It was subsequently lost, capsized off of Golden Gate. But it came out to collect up the natives. When it left, they took all the natives except for one woman who was left behind. That's the lone woman, Juana Maria Carana in the novel, same person. And there are a number of explanations as to how she got left behind. This is one of the real compelling questions of the whole thing. How did she get left behind? Well, let me share with you some of the versions of how she got left behind that have all appeared in print. These are pretty much from the earliest known account coming through time. And if you notice, they kind of get a little bit more elaborate, a little more flowery through time. You got to remember, this is going back, some of these are in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. They're Victorian times. All literature is kind of flowery and romantic. So as you can see, we've got a variety of stories to choose from, which ones to believe, which ones to cast aside. We can take a look at them. Okay. As I said, this part here, the boat left due to a gale. Remember I said it's real windy on the island? That's why that point is important. It does get very windy. The winds do come up abruptly, so that it's quite possible that a gale could have come up and the boat could have had to have left very, very abruptly. And if someone wasn't on board, they could have been left behind. That's quite possible. Okay. The stories that are in most of the literature you'll read